I will share an overview of how I came to do the research, the themes that emerged from it, and how I feel it all links together. However, the PowerPoint will also be able to show, you'll be able to read some of my co-materials, the actual voices of my amazing participants who have been willing to share with me, and now you, their life histories on natural environmental connections through the autistic perspective. I won't have time to read all these out to you, but by making them available on screen, I hope they will expand the understanding of how I have listened to their voices. Also, don't feel any pressure to read all the testimonials, as the amount of text may be a bit overwhelming. They are solely there to enrich your experience if it's beneficial to you. The slides will obviously also be available afterwards if you would like to go back to it. To give you a little bit of personal background, my name is Katrine. I grew up in Denmark. I've lived in the UK since 2001, and I was diagnosed as autistic at the age of 42. I've just completed a master's degree in environmental anthropology, and I'll be commencing a PhD candidacy next year at the Tissart Centre at University of Kent, with a special focus on autism and applied psychology. I've been a journalist, editor, researcher, and operational director, though always working by myself, as a big office environment is a little bit too overwhelming for me. I'm a proud, though slightly drained mother of 2 neurodivergent children, perpetual list maker, traveler, and passionate walker. My realization and later diagnosis made me understand my life story and personal behavioral patterns through a lens that made sense. I made sense. It has profoundly shifted my perspective of my life history, and it has been a relief to suddenly understand and accept that my lifelong feeling of alienation, it has a name, a community, a way for me to understand and accept my own challenges as well as strengths. My area of research is environmental anthropology. This is research into cultures, human patterns of behavior, and why we do what we do, framed by an environmental perspective and our psychological connection with our natural environments. My passion is for the individual human autistic connection with the natural world, how it feeds us, why it feeds us, and in which ways we can benefit from it. The project, one of the main things that I found when going through the very early stages of autistic identification was a profound shift in personal narrative. It made me aware of the limited research on the female autistic experience, as any autistic experience, and the historical lack of autistic voices generally. I realized the impact of masking and corresponding to societal expectations, the potential benefits and challenges of sensory processing, and the fact that late identification can be both traumatic and very liberating. This fueled my desire to add to this body of research. In true special interest fashion, I dropped all my previous work directions and threw myself headfirst into Naturally Connected Neurodiversity, which is a qualitative exploration of the late diagnosis and identification autistic experience and the role of natural environmental connections. The title also refers to my belief that neurodiversity isn't a pathological disorder, but a natural variation, certainly with its challenges, but also with strengths. As a master's project is limited, I needed a tight focus, hence the reason I've worked with women on this particular part of my research. But the issue obviously isn't specific in relation to CIS or non-CIS, genders or other identifications. I will expand the focus further on in my PhD. I very deliberately decided to include both diagnosed and self-identifying autistic people, as we all know there are many complexities in relation to achieving a diagnosis. I was incredibly fortunate that 38 autistic women were willing to share their personal stories and experiences with me in extraordinary detail of the complexity of late-stage autistic identification. It's been a great pride that I have read over 135,000 words on the strengths, determinism, self-acceptance, and resilience it has taken for many to reach where they are and where they hope to go. Over the summer, I've been working through my participants' extensive testimonials. As I listened to the recurring relief from a lot of participants of the enlightenment and no longer framing their life histories as different members of a majority culture, I realized that the topic of natural environmental connections for autistic women was surrounded by a framework of both external and internal processes, cultural conflict and stigma, as well as identity negotiation, subjective experiences, and sensory processing. So I structured my findings in three primary stages. I considered the implications of autistic minority culture as contrasting to neurotypical majority culture, resulting in requirements for masking behaviors with significant personal implications. In phase two, I reviewed how natural environmental connections have the potential in relation to alleviating these impacts. And in phase three, I looked at sensory processing differences related to natural environments to consider the various individual subjectiveness of autistic people. In the first chapter, I considered why we as autistics may need an escape, refuge, calm space within natural environments. As you'll be able to see here, this is where I start including comments from my participants directly. The open questions I was asking participants asked them to describe their own journey before, during, and after identification and analysis. Analysis elicited very extensive life history responses. These included references to childhood experiences and struggles over time, and a growing analysis of their own life experiences. The extensive personal conflict and challenges reverberated throughout the personal narratives of my ethnographic research. Most participants explained in detail about their challenges with majority cultural expectations, something they became particularly aware of during the time after their initial realization that they might be autistic. I found that many of my participants described how challenges with conforming to the majority cultural expectations, neurotypical expectations, led to very significant consequences from masking and camouflaging. As all of us know, there's a requirement for us as autistic individuals to camouflage our thought processes, then sensory profiles, and behavioral patterns to fit within the surrounding culture. This resulted in requirements for what can be considered coping strategies, though I'm not particularly fond of that word, to manage the psychological and physical impacts. The feelings of internal understanding and acceptance didn't necessarily translate into external understanding and acknowledgement by the surrounding culture, which leads to speculation of whether the neurodivergent community can indeed be seen should be seen as a recognized minority, marginalized culture with different and sometimes contrasting societal expectations. Now, unmasking and taking ownership of this personal agency in the form of saying I and owning that over time and in relation to self and others became increasingly important for my participants during the period of late autistic identification. We're all connected to our natural physical surroundings. Throughout history, particularly indigenous communities have connected with surrounding natural worlds. Societies have been bound by natural resources. And as individuals, we still live to a certain extent by the rules of nature. At the core of discourse on human-nature relationships is the persistent theme of a connection with nature. I argue that this can specifically be the case for autistic people, potentially due to a disconnect with the majority societal norms. At the heart of my interviews was the individual and their understanding of a place in nature as part of their new realigned and better understood narrative, when they've so often felt displaced or alienated throughout their lives. It could be seen as a source of relief, natural relief, at times of heightened stress. Neuroscientific research indicates that the way the human brain is influenced by its physical environments and benefits of meaningful exposure to nature may still be underestimated. Among many other areas of research, some specifically focused topics are relevant to the experience of autistic people. These include research showing that exposure to nature-based environment is associated with reduced levels of the hormone cortisol, which impacts stress levels, as well as higher activity in the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system, linking to calming in stressful situations. What emerged throughout the interviews was a distinct need as an autistic person to spend time in natural environments as a way to decompress from the stress, masking, and social demands. Within environmental anthropology, the distinction between internal social realm and external natural one has been questioned and give rise to more integrated projects relating people's use of their surroundings to specific personal needs. Researchers have also found that time spent in nature reduces symptoms of stress and anxiety by increasing vitamin D levels through exposure to sunlight, and increases feelings of what is called the eudaimonic well-being, a specific term encompassing giving value to life. It also promotes productions of neurotransmitters such as dopamine, of endorphins, and oxytocin. Research has noted that the emotional attachment that people form through experiential encounters with nature can be instrumental in developing commitments to nature. Masking illustrates the complex relationship involved between natural and social constructs, with extensive implications on us as autistic individuals. Having a connection with natural environment is a way to assist you with getting from where you are to where you want to be, and accessing your inner world without the external noise. These narratives highlight the construction of environmental identity as separate to participants' social identities. This aligns nature and non-human natural entities as valued components separate to the pressures and demands of society and moral majority culture. Numerous participants also found companionship and support through animals, and note a more symbiotic relationship between themselves and other living things. This aligns with environmental anthropology's explorations of perspective beyond the human and the interconnectedness of humanity and natural settings. If we consider the previous links of realigned personal identity and the connection of increased understanding of camouflage and masking behaviors, we see how potential benefits of environments without social actors, without other people. Unstructured solitary experiences can also connect with deeper feelings of primal mindfulness. It can offer a chance to take the pressure of having to constantly be on guard amongst other people. Meaningful experiences for participants included the term forest bathing in relation to experiencing woodlands through the use of all senses, noticing and maybe creatively representing tiny natural details, potentially through painting or photography, time spent with animals, listening to repetitive sounds of waves or other running water, watering or gardening. When we consider the individual experience of these engagement with natural environments, we end up with a focus strongly aligned with subjectivity, the term cross-cultural relativity, and even the term phenomenology. This particularly considers the ways in which meanings become and are reality to people ourselves, how meanings appear to us and coincide with the practical everyday world in which we exist. Several studies have found that these experiences of neurodivergent people may be related to different sensory tolerances and sensitivities, and not, as sometimes can be described, as irrational considerations. I suggest that the individual experiences of connections with natural environments are significantly impacted by these sensory differences. This sensory processing emerge as a core connective link between natural environmental connections and the impact on the autistic experience. While the autistic person's sensory processing can be overwhelming and stressful, it can also allow them to make deeper connections and explore aspects more creatively than some neurotypical people. Autistic people can both be hypersensitive and hyposensitive, which may vary between senses. And this has the potential to vary in intensity depending on mental, physical health, or other factors. Some autistic women felt that they have become increasingly aware of their tolerances and sensitivities after identification. Several participants found that nature have a really clear positive impact on their senses, particularly when one compares them to the ones in everyday life. Becoming aware of their autistic identity created feelings of less tolerance because they were actively working on embracing their autistic identity. However, others found that they have had complex relationship with natural environments throughout their lives due to sensory processing. Sensory overwhelm can be a significant barrier. Light and bright sunlight were noted as frequent sources of overwhelm, as well as heat and changes in temperature and other atmospheric conditions. Strong winds were also mentioned as overpowering, causing tensions and feeling of exhaustion, whereas one participant mentioned the unpredictability of windy or rainy days, and dry and dust, as well as textures and mess of sand, could be examples of sensations with unpleasant connotations. But a very strong consensus from the majority of participants was the role of natural environmental connections in mental health. Obviously, not all will experience a deep connection with natural environments. As noted in the ethnographic accounts, for some the sensory aspects was too overwhelming, but the patterns of becoming aware of sensory processing, the need for camouflage and masking relief, the requirement to decompress from the expectations of the surrounding majority culture often applied to the divergent community. I felt particularly moved and related to this comment on the sensory impact of natural environments, which I will read out. I'm in no way religious, but when I walk in the forest, where the tree trunks stretch in hushed silence like columns towards the sky, canopies entwine above my head and give the illusion of a shielding roof. Leaves filter the sunlight as if they were made of stained glass, and the ambience feels almost alive with a supernatural incandescence. I feel as if I have entered the cathedral of nature. It resets and grounds me, humbles me and makes me appreciative at the same time. And I always leave with the inner feeling of solemn peace. The inflexibility of concrete does not positively contribute to the healing process of a broken or bruised mind. When I consider autism research still being predominantly studied from an external position of observing behaviors, I believe there's a need in contemporary research of further articulations of the meanings of why and how our lived experiences are subjectively different for neurodivergent people. And this is where the importance of this research lies. Current resources after diagnosis are not always available and often focus primarily on external requirements for support. I have found very little support in relation to the processing of the internal restructuring required to become increasingly self-aware and lead onto self-acceptance. Multidisciplinary support, which may include the potential of natural environment connections, as explained in this project, has the potential to benefit us in our search for self-acceptance of our new autistic realigned life stories. And that's where we can get a sense of our own perspectives. I have further hopes for the project. While the initial objective is academic work, I'm hoping it can become a beneficial resource going forward. It can hopefully evolve to become an additional place for narratives for others to identify with, learn from, support and explore our individual journeys. I feel a profound sense of commitment to the people who have entrusted me with their stories and hope for their stories being told. And I'm hoping to be part of a new wave of qualitative neurodiversity research aiming to reframe the experiences of autistic people with an understanding and an acceptance of our narrative. If you would like to know more or contact me, obviously feel free to visit my website, naturalneurodiversity.com, though my research findings are not yet published. Thank you so much for listening to me.